Regarding political consequences of different development paths, a new UN report has strongly condemned Israel for the de-development and deteriorating humanitarian conditions of the Palestinian territories of East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip brought about by Israel's 50-year occupation. The report from the UN also says the performance of the Palestine economy is far below potential, while unemployment rates have persisted at levels rarely seen worldwide since the Great Depression. The steady decline in GDP growth over the past 2 decades, the imposition of Palestinian economic dependence on Israel, and the theft of Palestinian natural resources reaffirms a previous finding that the Palestinian economy would be at least twice as large if the occupation were lifted. This shows if the occupation were lifted, the development of the country would progress instead of diminish. Regarding the decisions about allocation of aid, in response to the deadlock of the peace process, France is calling for an active mobilization of the international community in order to preserve the two-state resolution and spark new momentum for peace. France also organized a Middle East Peace Conference, which brought together nearly 70 states and IGOs. France is an active contributor to Palestine's economic development and the consolidation of the institutions of the future Palestinian states. It devotes considerable sums, such as 434 million euros for the period 2008 to 2015 and nearly 40 million euros in 2016 to aid for Palestine.
What is Hamas and the PLO? Hamas is the Palestinian Islamic Organization militant group that comes in constant and often violent conflict with the Israeli state and its institutions. Hamas's charter used to call for the destruction of Israel, but after 2017, it has allowed for the acceptance of a separate Palestinian state. Despite this, Hamas refuses to acknowledge Israel as a legitimate state. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO, is considered the representation of the Palestinian people. Fatah is the secular nationalist party that controls the PLO. The PLO operates in the West Bank, but not Gaza, as Gaza is overseen by Hamas. The PLO has made several attempts at peace talks, but its authority has diminished due to conflict with Hamas. The PLO's chair, Mahmoud Abbas, is opposed to violence, which has helped in de-escalating highly intense conflicts like the Second Intifada in the early 2000s. The interests of the two groups, with those being the Israeli Authority and the Palestinian groups, come to light in the legal frameworks. Zionism is an ideology positing that Judaism is both a religion and a nationality. It advocates for a Jewish state in Israel, Jewish people's ancestral land. Zionism became increasingly popular and important amongst the Jewish people during the late 19th century and early 20th century after Theodor Herzl, an Austrian Jewish journalist, documented hate crimes against Jewish people and concluded that Jewish people could not survive without their own state. Zionism advocates for a Jewish state and is the reason for much of the conflict in Israel-Palestine. Though not inherently harmful, its application has resulted in the displacement of thousands of Palestinians. An example of this violence is seen in the case of Aisha Rabi, who, while riding home with her husband and daughter, was struck by a large rock which was suspected to have been thrown by an Israeli youth. The injury resulted in her death before her husband made it to the hospital, which caused outrage amongst Palestinians.
Amnesty International's concerns are based on international standards and applied equally within the proper legal framework. The legal framework is defined by who retains jurisdiction or effective control over an area and the circumstances or situation at the time of the human rights violation. Amnesty's concerns within the Israel proper, the area inside the 1949 West Bank, East Jerusalem, and 1951 Gaza Strip, also called the 1967 borders, include but are not limited to ill treatment and torture of detainees, excessive use of force, the detention of conscientious objectors, and forced evictions and home demolitions within unrecognized Bedouin villages. Human rights violation by Israeli forces in the occupied Palestinian territories have included but are not limited to home demolitions and the forced eviction of Palestinian families, punitive arrests, unfair trials, ill treatment, and torture of detainees, and the use of excessive or lethal force due to subdue nonviolent demonstrations, as well as the use of restrictive legal means. In the article, it talks about how a Palestinian group, which calls himself Youth of Hell, where someone dropped a jagged rock the size of a football that crashed through a widescreen and struck Aisha Rabi one Friday in October. Rabi, a mother of 8, was on her way home just after 10 p.m. with her husband, who was driving, and their 8-year-old daughter, who was in the back seat. The incidents often follow violence by Palestinians against Israelis in the West Bank. 144 such cases of violence were reported in 2018, 33% lower than the year before, but involving 7 killings, higher than in 2017. No government is entirely without corruption, and the Palestinian Authority suffers from unique disadvantages. It is not a state, and it does not have control over territory it supposedly governs. It must deal with Hamas in Gaza, and so on. Civil society does exist in the Palestinian territories, and one of the strongest organizations is the one that fights corruption, the Coalition for Accountability and Integrity. It was established in 2000 and is linked to Transparency International. Israeli security officials have expressed concern about an increase in attacks and have reportedly increased their presence in some areas. The Israeli Justice Ministry has previously said it makes considerable efforts to enhance law enforcement in West Bank. However, the UN says Israel, as an occupying power, has failed to ensure attacks are investigated effectively and perpetrators are held accountable.
The current Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been occurring off and on since the creation of the modern State of Israel in the 1940s. This is largely because of the United Kingdom's promise to create a Jewish state in a majority Arab nation. This was promised in the Balfour Declaration, which the United Kingdom published in the 1920s. Along with this public declaration, however, several secret agreements were made, some of which promised the protection of the Arab population, such as communiques with the Sultan of Mecca. Eventually, after World War II, the United Nations stepped in to create the modern states of Israel and Palestine, which have been in constant conflict with themselves and the neighboring states since then. Several large-scale wars, like the Yom Kippur War and the Six-Day War, have been fought, both leading to victories for Israel and more persecutions for the Palestinian and Arab populations. An example of another event is the Nakba, which was a massive displacement of Palestinian people from the state of Israel. And then, along with this, the Palestinians fought the resistance movements, the First and Second Fatah, which started out as a violent protest against Israeli occupation and then slowly organized itself into more political, legal, and non-violent movement, which it is today. Over time, these lasting historical conflicts have led to the creation of differing ideologies of Palestinian and Israeli nationalism. This can be seen in Hamas and the PLO in Palestine, and the current Israeli government and the settler movement in Israel. Coupled with forms of religious extremism, both Islamic and Jewish, has caused the conflict to continue and even escalate in a vicious cycle. For example, the current Israeli settlement movement is displacing Palestinians from promised homeland to them that was given to them by the UN at the expense of their human rights. Another example is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, which was started by Palestinian protesters and has since spread worldwide to try to influence the Israeli government to change their ways and give more human rights protection to Palestinians. Overall, the different regimes in Israel and Palestine and their complex ideologies and nationalistic intentions have caused the conflict to continue and caused the overall stability of the country to decline. The stability of the region has been negatively impacted by these different ideologies and of the prolonged history of sustained conflict. These have created a complex institutional problem which has led the current states of Israel and Palestine to become extremely unstable. For example, in Palestine there are currently 2 governments, both of which has disputed control. This is the Palestine Liberation Movement and Hamas. The Israeli government is extremely factionalized, with the national legislature of only 120 seats, but representing 22 political parties, where the majority party only has a 1-seat plurality. In addition to this government, Israel and Palestine have been accused of multiple human rights abuses, such as torture allegations, intense protest movements, and complicated legal systems that lead to ambiguous fates for dissenters of the government, as well as multiple deaths and other crimes committed by Israeli settlers, such as a Palestinian woman being killed by an Israeli settler throwing a rock at her car, and then no further action being taken against the Israeli settler. Israel and Palestine is a prime example for how ideologies and an intense history of conflict can couple to make the stability of the country decrease overall in dramatic ways that has a very negative impact on the state's overall development and the quality of life for its citizens.
Crash Course is filmed here in the Chad and Stacy Emigholz studio in Indianapolis, and it's made possible by our subscribers on Subbable, so thanks to you all. By the way, if you want to learn more about Israel and Palestine, our friends at Thought Cafe have made a series of videos. You can also find a link to them in the video info below. Thanks again to all our Subbable subscribers. Thanks to the educators who share these videos with their students, and to the students who share them with their teachers. As we say in my hometown, don't forget to be awesome.